Here are the top 5 reasons why you should finance your car at Kemba Financial Credit Union. 1. Lower your payments. 2. Quick access to cash. 3. Reduce interest. 4. Consolidate debt. And 5. Get up to $500 cash back and no payments for 90 days. Apply at Kemba.org. Restrictions apply. Equal opportunity lender. Offer ends 8/31/25.
If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 559, The French Navy Fights Back. Last time, elements of General Patton's army had come ashore around the city of Fadala, itself just north of Casablanca. The tide had been rough on the Americans, as had the French artillery. Still, the Americans were on shore, and soon Fadala was theirs. That being the case, the naval component with Patton started heading south towards Casablanca, but now coming at them were 7 enemy destroyers and 7 submarines. The idea of Casablanca's Vice Admiral Michelier was to go after the transports, thus cutting off the invaders from further supplies and trapping them on shore. And the first French destroyer salvo directly hit a landing craft, destroying it and killing all those on board. Right away, the American destroyers Wilkes and Ludlow started shelling the more numerous enemy destroyers. Obviously outnumbered, help was on the way. But for now, this was the 2 American destroyers' battle. At 8:34 a.m., the Ludlow hit and set ablaze the 2,500-ton destroyer Milan. But then she took a direct hit herself. The repair crew told their captain that they would need a few hours to get everything back up and running, which meant for now it was 6 French destroyers against 1 American. Unacceptable odds. The 2 destroyers left the area. This, of course, left the transports open to attack. So Rear Admiral Hewitt ordered his flagship, the heavy cruiser Augusta, the light cruiser Brooklyn, and the destroyers Wilkes and Swanson to counterattack. This meant the Wilkes was going back in, but she wasn't going in alone. The French destroyers were now only 4 miles from the U.S. transports, but at 8:48 a.m., the U.S. counterattacking force, though 10 miles away, poured on the speed. Soon, another engagement got underway. 12 minutes later, at 9 a.m., the French ships retreated closer to Casablanca, under the protection of the city's coastal guns. Fortunately for the Americans, no other transports had been destroyed. But now it was the time for the French fleet to be reinforced. The 7,300-ton cruiser Primouille met up with the destroyers, and together they prepared to attack the Americans. Rear Admiral Hewitt told Rear Admiral Giffen those French vessels had to be neutralized, not just chased away. While the Augusta and the Brooklyn returned to protect the transports, the rest of the covering group made for the waters near Casablanca. When the American vessels were 19,400 yards or 11 miles away, having rushed over at 27 knots, they opened fire at 9:18 a.m. The French, deciding against a direct contest, threw up smoke and then started short, sharp attacks, rushing forward, letting loose, and then retreating back into the smoke. And then a moment of opportunity came for the French that they had been building to. 2 of their destroyers burst through the smoke, coming closer this time to the covering group. But when just under 11 miles away, the Massachusetts and the Tuscaloosa each achieved a hit on the destroyer Fougas, the result being an explosion, her destruction, and then her sinking, while just over 6 miles north of Casablanca. During this exchange, though, the guns at El Hank, 8 in all, 4 194mm and 4 138.6mm, had not stayed silent. Firing through this contest, they then scored a hit on the Massachusetts. This shell landed forward, but just after this, the battleship then had to dodge 4 French torpedoes, and one only missed by 15 feet. Soon after, the Tuscaloosa did her own dance, dodging another 4 torpedoes from the enemy submarine Medusa. But even this contest was a part of a much larger French plan. While the covering force was mixing it up with torpedoes, destroyers, land-based artillery, and French fighters, 3 French destroyers had detached themselves and went back north, up along the coast, to again go after the transports. The French were using a tactic as old as time itself, using the enemy's eagerness to engage against them. But at 9:51 a.m., Hewitt ordered his 2 cruisers and 3 destroyers to block this latest French attack. A general engagement was back on. The Brooklyn dodged 5 more torpedoes from the Amazon, while the Primouille and 6 destroyers took on the cruisers Augusta and Brooklyn, and the destroyers Wilkes, Swanson, and Bristol. Though outnumbered, the Americans stayed aggressive. The French were counting on this. At 10:46 a.m., the Brooklyn was hit by a torpedo, yet, as its crew hunkered down, waiting for the shudder that would come from the explosion, nothing happened. It was a dud. Still, the French destroyers got around the Americans and made their way back to the American transports, the covering group close upon their heels, minus the Massachusetts. By now, she had already used up 60% of her 16-inch ammunition, and as the battleship Richelieu at Dakar was still a threat, Giffen chose this moment to withdraw her, just in case. The French ships never made it back to threaten the transports. Within minutes, the American vessels damaged the Primouille, Milan, and Brestois. Suddenly, the French did not have the numerical superiority, so turned back for Casablanca, which is when aircraft from the Ranger further damaged the Brestois, and she would lose all power, becoming dead in the water.
Hello, this is Matt from the Explorers Podcast. I want to invite you to join me on the voyages and journeys of the most famous explorers in the history of the world. At the Explorers Podcast, we plunge into jungles and deserts, across mighty oceans and frigid ice caps, over and to the top of great mountains, and even into outer space. These are the thrilling and captivating stories of Magellan, Shackleton, Lewis and Clark, and so many other famous and not so famous adventurers from throughout history. So come give us a listen. We'd love to have you. Go to explorerspodcast.com or just look us up on your podcast app. That's the Explorers Podcast.
Back under the protective umbrella of the guns of El Hank, the Brooklyn nevertheless finished off the Boulogne at 11:12 a.m. Needing to do something to break up the building American momentum, 3 French destroyers began to form up to launch a torpedo attack, basically sending out so many torpedoes at enemy ships, something was sure to make contact. But before this could be attempted, the shells from Tuscaloosa and Wichita forced the enemy destroyers to break apart. Which is when the Wichita was hit at 11:28 a.m. by one of the El Hank guns, wounding 14 men on board. Hoping to take advantage of this, a French submarine fired 3 torpedoes at the stricken Wichita, but her crew was still alert and moved out of harm's way. Meanwhile, American shells hit Frondeur, forcing her back closer to Casablanca. But even then, she was hit anew by bullets from Ranger's aircraft. Now it was the French destroyer Albatross's turn to be removed from the action, as she was hit 3 times, and then 2 more times by bombs from Dauntlesses. At noon, both sides went quiet to lick their wounds, assess their individual situations, and plan for the next engagement, which the French started at 12:45. Hoping again to catch the Americans off guard, a sloop and 2 minesweepers were sent north to attack the transports, but a Dauntless bombed the sloop and all 3 ships turned back. Hoping to do more damage, but risking less, that afternoon the Rangers sent an organized attack against the Primouille, wrecking the cruiser and killing 29 of her bridge crew. The same was tried against the guns of El Hank, adding in naval fire for good measure, but her guns remained defiant. The battery even drove off the attacking Wichita and Tuscaloosa at 2:50 p.m. As for the larger air battles in the area, the Americans had the advantage of it, but not by much. The Rangers' aircraft had shot down 7 Hawk 75s and took out 5 parked French Dauntlesses, but those that remained kept sneaking up to the north to strafe the enemy infantry on the beaches. But what was really hurting the American ground troops from taking the fight to the enemy was the lack of landing craft. As we've seen, the rough tide made bringing one of those onto the beach a headache, and for those men that fell overboard, as some were heavily loaded down, they never came up again. But as it was, there was still some 15,000 tons of supplies on the various ships near the beaches. The way it was working out, it looked like that only 1,000 tons could be offloaded each day near Fadala. That wasn't going to do anyone any good. By 5 p.m. that D-Day, only 16% of the vehicles and 1.1% of the supplies were on land. Meanwhile, 140 miles or 225 kilometers south of Casablanca was the phosphate exporting town Safi, with its artificial deep harbor. There were 25,000 inhabitants scattered around Safi, but it was the 4 130mm M1924 guns of the Batterie de la Ruse, northeast of Safi along the coast, and the 2 75mm guns and 155mm guns of the Batterie du Port just south that worried the Americans. Along with these 2 batteries were 1,000 French soldiers, 15 light tanks, and 5 armored cars. Also, about a half day away at Marrakesh, to the southeast, was another 3,400 troops, 30 tanks, 10 armored cars, and 2 battalions of horse-drawn artillery. Taking this on was Major General Ernest Harmon of the 2nd Armored Division and his 6,428 Sub-Task Force, Blackstone, or the Southern Attack Group. Rear Admiral Lyle Davidson, in charge of the naval component, had a light cruiser, a battleship, the auxiliary carrier Santee, 8 destroyers, 4 transports, a sea train, which carries loaded railroad cars, and several other support vessels. In the dark, just before November 7th, turned into November 8th, D-Day, 350 assault troops transferred aboard the destroyers Cole and Bernardo, now about 8 miles offshore. At 3:45 a.m., now November 8th, these ships began to move towards Safi. The Bernardo entered the harbor at 4:28 a.m., but the port guns responded with 155mm, 75mm, and machine guns, as well as star shells. Bernardo's 3-inch and 20mm guns answered back. First, the fire coming from the old Portuguese fortress on top of the bluffs just south of the main port were silenced. This gave enough space for Bernardo to dock at 4:30 a.m. and unload Company K, 47th Infantry Regiment. The Cole did the same at 4:45 a.m., unloading Company L. By first light, these 2 companies were in possession of the major parts of the port, despite this being their first wartime experience. But the day wasn't over yet. Meanwhile, additional forces of 3 waves of infantry and 1 of M5 Stewart light tanks also reached Safi's beaches. They would also be landing at and just above the main port facilities. The French guns opened up on them, to wit the radio question went out, "Batter up?" Admiral Davidson would reply with, "Play ball," but the GIs were already firing. By 5:30 a.m., more than 600 American troops were on the beaches just north of the port, beaches red, blue and green. Nearby French soldiers began firing at them. The Americans fired back. When first light did come, the American warships became more accurate with their contributions. At 8:50 a.m., the battery Rieux, northwest of the city, was taken out by the guns of the battleship New York, and Curtiss SOC Seagull float planes from the Philadelphia bombed the 155mm battery just south of Safi, along the coast. The fighting on the beaches continued, but at 10 a.m., a platoon of M5 light tanks landed and secured Green Beach, furthest into the harbor area. This allowed the 1st BLT, or Battalion Landing Team, to capture Fort du Mer, a position just behind the cliffs north of the harbor. After the 1st BLT was fully ashore, the 2nd BLT also started landing, and then the 3rd BLT. That the French could not stop them spelled their doom. By 10:45 a.m., all the French batteries were silenced. As for the resistance closest to the coast, the Portuguese fort just south of the harbor, which had been the first to open fire on the Americans, was the last position to be captured by the Americans. That afternoon, the Americans had a foothold 6 miles deep. The day ended, the fighting had not. Just over 50 miles or 80 kilometers southeast of Safi is Marrakesh. The Americans knew that the French had forces there, but had to react when at 1:50 p.m. the next day, November 9th, a column of numerous trucks, all carrying troops, was on the road to Safi from Marrakesh. It took a while, but 7 Dauntlesses and 3 Wildcats formed up and flew to the southeast. But not at the column. Not at first. More worried about the enemy aircraft at the airfield at Marrakesh, the U.S. aircraft flew over the column and strafed the landing strip, wrecking 26 French planes, all kinds. Only then did they turn around and do the same to the column, destroying 20 trucks full of men. Meanwhile, at 5 p.m., the armored landing team moved inland from Safi and engaged other French forces at Bab Gedra. Here, the French proved more determined than the Americans expected, the fighting going on into the night. It started up again the next morning of November 10th. But Major General Harmon, commander of the Southern Attack Group, had no intention of getting bogged down. So at 9 a.m. that morning, the 2nd Armored Division's combat unit broke off and started heading north for Casablanca. The ring around the Moroccan capital began to form.
Have you ever wondered why we call French fries, or why something is the greatest thing since sliced bread? There are answers to those questions. Everything Everywhere Daily is a podcast for curious people who want to learn more about the world around them. Every day, you'll learn something new about things you never knew you didn't know. Subjects include history, science, geography, mathematics, and culture. If you're a curious person and want to learn more about the world you live in, just subscribe to Everything Everywhere Daily wherever you cast your pod.
The force that made up the 3rd and final landing, the Northern Attack Group, was designated Goalpost. They had the unenviable objective of taking control of the all-weather airfield at Port Ute, 90 miles or 144 kilometers north of Casablanca, and 5 miles inland, as in, they would have to fight their way there. The good news was that the airfield could be reached by traveling up the Cebu River for 9 miles. The bad news was that, as there were French forces stationed a distance from the airfield in different directions, to reach the airfield was to, in a sense, entrap oneself. First, there were the cliffs at the mouth of the Cebu River at Medea that had to be navigated past. There, a 16th century stone Portuguese fortress called Casbah held a coastal battery that had to be survived. Meanwhile, at the airport itself, there were just over 3,000 troops, and to the south, at Rabat, over 1,200 mechanized cavalry troops and 45 light tanks were waiting. A bit further south than them was another 6,000 French troops. When the task force entered the Cebu River, they would have to navigate its U shape. They would travel in a bit, then go to the north, then turn east, and then turn south before reaching the airfield. Yes, it was only 5 miles inland, but the distance they had to travel was 9 miles by river, giving the French plenty of time to prepare. As one torch planter put it would be hard to pick out a more difficult place to assault in all of West Africa. And then the plan began to fall apart. Coming across the Atlantic, the naval formation and journey had been damn near textbook, but now that the landing craft were full of soldiers, maneuvering to get into their final position, it became chaos. This gave the defenders even more time to move their men into place and to call on the French fleet. By the time Major General Lucien Truscott was ready to give the go-ahead, instead, he had to order a delay. Now, there were several French vessels stationed in between the target beaches and the transports. Just then, the Americans saw a French steamer use code to tell their comrades, "Be warned, alert on shore for 0500. Any trace of surprise had been lost. Still, Truscott ordered the men ashore. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So we've got the Americans at the third and final place before they can consolidate this and move on. So we'll go from there. So anyways, I just want to thank some members and those who have recently donated. I don't know if you saw this on the social media, but even though it's 2025, me and my whole family got COVID. So I was literally out of it for a week, but almost there. Almost getting back. So sorry for I didn't do 2 episodes. I don't even remember last week, and that's the truth. Anyway, so you didn't ask. Anyway, so the latest members who get 3 or 4 episodes a month, and I've started a new series, a mini series. Let's see here: Joanne Jewell, Jenna Bennick, Jason Rogers, and Matthew Baugh. Thank you very much for supporting the show. It is greatly appreciated. And as for those who have made donations, Matthew Dawson, Stephen Thorpe, and Cohen White. And Cohen, I think I've seen your name here a couple times. So thank you very much for your support. It is greatly appreciated. And as long as my voice, continues to return, we'll do another episode later on this week. And of course, I have a membership episode coming out. So I'll see you as soon as I can. Remember, COVID's still around, so just be careful. And take care, everyone.
From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.
Welcome to True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.